Shifting landscapes. I guess my landscape is shifting out of the present and into the past. As we engage in what I'm calling disappearing history. And so I'm returning to older influences on my own education as a way to try to think about education in the present. And so I return to certain heroes that are important to me and who made education significant and possible for me. These are people who we no longer have, but who made it possible for those who were marginalized in education to believe that we could, in fact, have an education. And so to think or rethink education is to return to the absence of those figures and to begin to imagine what the meaning of those figures might be for the precarious present in which we live. And so I do turn to a figure like James Baldwin and others who were really quite important. And I'm very proud that my paper was accepted at the Baldwin conference in Paris, at the University of Paris this May, end of May. And it's a project I've been working on for quite a long time and workshopped a number of papers in this area trying to think about Baldwin and to work out the notion of extracurriculars, which of course gestures towards some very early work in my own education in curriculum reconceptualization, the work of Bill Pinar, that is the autobiographical question of the teacher's life and the role of the teacher's life in the making of curriculum. So I do turn, or return, you can give that image of Baldwin, yeah, return to Baldwin's extracurriculars because I think his early education, in fact, constitutes a particular model for what it might mean to become educated in times where education is, in fact, disappearing, where one has to figure out how to make a demand on one's own education in and against a context in which education, in fact, is receding. And so, you go to the next slide. And so Baldwin, of course, had many, of course, some students today do have many interesting teachers, but Baldwin had many interesting teachers. But the point of Baldwin is that he became what he became not so much because of the school, but because of the extracurricular experience that he was fortunate to have because teachers and others paid attention to his very curious intelligence. And so you have people like Arilla Bill Miller, for example, who wasn't a teacher. She was a communist, in fact, but she was the first one to engage his curious intelligence in elementary school. He was only 11 years old, taking him to films, producing his plays, encouraging him to write. He had other teachers, County Cullen, the great African-American poet. His principal in elementary school was the first African-American principal in New York City. He went to the famed DeWitt Clinton High School, where many, many important figures emerged from that school. In fact, I have an image of his high school yearbook, and it's quite incredible to see what the students wrote under their names when he graduated, I think in 1941 it must have been. And in fact, under his name, he says, "I want to be a world-famous writer," which is precisely what he became. And most of the ideas that students in that school had for themselves, they became just those things. And it's really quite incredible that we can go back to a moment in the history of education where teachers were engaged in this particular kind of way and where students became precisely the kinds of things that they wanted to become. So Baldwin is, in a sense, a figure that I am going to work on. But in addition to this project, I'm now beginning to work on another project about a less well-known writer, expatriate, Vincent O. Carter, who also went to Europe from Kansas City, Missouri, arriving in Paris in 1953, but quickly moving to Bern, Switzerland, where he remained until his death in 1983. And Carter is a very interesting figure, primarily because he was so off the beaten path. He wasn't a prolific writer like Baldwin or Richard Wright or others who went to Europe during that period, but he led a very interesting life, and an interesting life of survival and an interesting life of the mind in Bern. And this is what I am after, after the extracurricular life of Carter as a means by which to continue to rethink the nature of the extracurricular that may be the more important shifting landscape of education that we might begin to turn to. A number of things are happening here. Aside from this conference, I'm starting the project on Carter in Bern, Switzerland. I am trying to think again about, 1 minute, okay, I'll just go through this little part here. I'm trying to think a lot of things about Carter, and particularly I'm interested in a Swiss writer who was equally eccentric, Robert Walser, who died in 1956, but whose work is now just beginning to be published in English. Very significant writer who had terrific influence on people like Walter Benjamin. So this is not a small-time writer. This was a very major thinker who lived well off the beaten path. I have the idea of trying to experiment when I go to Bern or go back to Bern with a kind of digital essay in which I want to try to map out from Carter's very interesting memoir, the Bern book, all of the places that he walked about and hung out in, worked and lived and wrote, and to try to go to some of these places to document them with a digital camera and then overlay those images with text from his own writing. So that's the shifting landscape for me.
Thank you.